You are in the middle of a film when your phone buzzes, which you know before looking is your landlord because your landlord has developed a specific texting pattern over the past 3 weeks that you recognize the way you recognize weather, not by looking directly at it, but by the quality of light it produces in your peripheral vision. You pause the film, which you were watching on a laptop in your apartment on a Tuesday afternoon, because you do not currently have anywhere to be on a Tuesday afternoon, which is the condition that produced the landlord's texting pattern in the first place. The message says what messages from landlords always say when they have been waiting long enough to stop being politely indirect, which is that the rent is now 3 weeks past due and that he needs a resolution by Friday or he will have to begin proceedings. You put the phone face down on the cushion. You look at the paused frame on your laptop, which is a close-up of an actor's face in the moment before something bad happens to them, and you think that this is a reasonable image for the moment. You closed the cafe job 4 weeks ago when the cafe closed permanently, abruptly, the owner posting a handwritten sign on the door that said, "Thank you for 9 years," which is a sentiment that did not include you, but that you were somehow supposed to absorb as closure. You open your laptop to a different tab and you search for hiring near me, and you look at the list with the specific attention of someone who has moved past preference into necessity, which is a different kind of looking, more comprehensive, and less choosy and occasionally surprising in what it finds acceptable. The cinema on the high street has a posting. Team member, no experience necessary, flexible hours, starting pay $10.80 an hour. You think about what you know about cinemas, which is that you have been to them as a customer and that on some level everyone has been to them as a customer, and you apply, which takes 9 minutes, and you get a call back in 2 days, which is fast enough to suggest that the cinema's hiring needs and your availability are in close enough alignment to make the whole thing feel less like opportunity and more like mutual desperation finding a handshake. The interview is with the general manager, a man named Paul, who is maybe 35, and who has the manner of someone who was promoted into management from the floor years ago and has retained just barely the institutional memory of what the floor is like, though it has been long enough that the memory has softened. He asks you standard questions. He tells you about the role. He says the team is great, very collaborative, you'll fit right in. He says the hardest part is the weekend rushes and keeping on top of the cleanliness standards after showings. He says the word cleanliness with a slight emphasis that you file away without examining yet. He says you can start Thursday. You say that works. You shake hands. You go home and text your landlord that you've got something starting Thursday and you'll have a partial payment by the end of next week. And he responds, "Okay, keep me posted," which is landlord for "I am watching you," and you put the phone down and you finish the film. Thursday arrives and you arrive with it 5 minutes early, in the cleanest version of what the dress code email described as smart casual. And the shift leader who checks you in is a girl named Priya, who is 19 and has been here 8 months, and who gives you the tour with the practiced efficiency of someone who has given this tour often enough to have trimmed it to its functional minimum. She shows you the concessions counter, the projection booth you won't need to access, the cleaning cupboard with its specific hierarchy of tools, the break room, which is a word being used liberally to describe a room with a table, a microwave with a condition, and a folding chair that has a preference about which direction it faces. She shows you the auditoriums, which are 7, numbered not sequentially but according to a logic that predates the current management and that nobody has ever corrected. She tells you the 3 things that will get you in trouble: popcorn on the floor of the auditoriums after the last showing, a long queue at concessions with staff visibly idle, and phones on the floor during a shift. She says Paul is fine, but that the assistant manager, a woman named Karen, monitors the queue camera from her office and will come down if the line reaches the rope barrier, and that Karen coming down is something to be avoided. You absorb this the way you absorb all operational intelligence and new jobs carefully, without expression, as data for the environment you now have to navigate. Your first task is concessions, which is where they put new people, because concessions is the most visible and the most immediately training compatible, in the sense that it has a procedure you can learn and a performance you can execute before the end of your first shift. You are shown the POS system, which is intuitive in the way of something designed by committee, technically functional, somewhat hostile in its logic, requiring 2 additional taps for every action that should take 1. You are shown how to fill a large popcorn, which has a technique involving the scoop angle and the settle and top up that takes longer to describe than to execute. You are shown the upsell script, which is not a script exactly, but a sequence of offers that you are expected to make in order upgrade to large, add a drink, add a side, and you are told by Priya in a tone that is matter of fact that Karen tracks the average transaction value on the POS reports, and that if your numbers are consistently below the floor average, it will be a conversation. You say you understand, you put on the apron, the first customers arrive. The weekend rush is a thing that exists in a different category from what the word rush suggests in ordinary language. You have been in busy service environments before. The cafe had its rushes, the lunch hour compression of orders and temperaments, the machine of it. This is different in a specific way. It is simultaneous rather than sequential, meaning not a line of people that you work through, but a sudden full presence of every customer at once. The moment between showings when 3 films let out and 2 begin, and the foyer achieves a human density that converts space into pressure. The queue reaches the barrier in 4 minutes. Karen appears at the edge of the concessions counter so quickly that she must have been watching the camera in real time, and she says to no one in particular that she needs more hands here. And 2 people materialize from somewhere, and the queue begins to move, and you keep your head down and work the POS, and fill the orders and make the upsell offers in sequence. Because you are new enough that the performance of competence is the only control you have over your position here. You earn that first week. £62 for a 4-shift week of about 22 hours, which is not rent but is partial rent. And you send it to your landlord with a message that says more coming Friday, which is true if Friday includes next Friday. And he responds with a scene receipt and no words, which is its own kind of response. You are at $10.80 an hour. Your rent is $820 a month. You do the arithmetic in the break room on your second Wednesday, sitting with the folding chair in its preferred orientation, eating a sandwich you brought from home because the staff discount on concessions is 20% off, and a medium popcorn is still £4 at 20% off, and a sandwich from home is 60 pence. The arithmetic requires 35 hours a week to cover rent alone. You are currently scheduled for 22. You will need more shifts or another solution. And more shifts requires Paul, and Paul requires goodwill. And goodwill requires performing well on the shifts you have, and so you go back out to the floor and you perform well. The popcorn smell is something you thought you'd like and that you've stopped noticing by week 2, except when you come home and your coat carries it and your flatmate, you have a flatmate now. A situation arranged 3 weeks into the cinema job with a colleague named Seb, who had a box room available and whose own financial situation made him receptive to someone who could pay partial rent in advance. Wrinkles his nose slightly and then says nothing, which is the contract you've both tacitly agreed to regarding the smell. You stop noticing it at work completely by week 4. You start noticing instead all the things the smell was covering. The carpet in Auditorium 3 that has a dampness issue under the popcorn and cola topcoat, the break room microwave's interior history, the particular quality of air in the cleaning cupboard, which is where you spend more time than the tour suggested you would. The cleaning is the part nobody explained fully. Not because Priya was dishonest, she mentioned cleanliness standards, Karen's interest in them, but because the full reality of post-showing cleaning is the kind of thing that has to be experienced rather than described. You take a bin bag and a long-handled picker and an antibacterial spray bottle, and you go into the auditorium after the credits roll and the lights come up, and you work row by row while the next audience is queuing outside. And you have 12 minutes to do 140 seats, which is achievable if the showing was a quiet matinee on a Tuesday, and is not achievable if the showing was a children's film at 4 p.m. on a Saturday, during which some customers appear to have interpreted their ticket price as a license for a behavioral standard they would not apply in their own homes. You learn what people leave behind. You learn it comprehensively and without the ability to unlearn it. You develop a poker face that functions independently of what you are encountering, which is a skill that begins as performance and becomes, over months, genuinely involuntary. Seb is your main social architecture at the cinema, which is the particular bonding of people who share a commute and a grievance and a microwave. Seb has been here 14 months and has the specific cynicism of someone who arrived with lower expectations than you did and has still managed to have them partially met. He tells you useful things. That Paul is reasonable about shift requests if you give 2 weeks notice, and if you haven't made too many of them recently, that Karen's camera monitoring is real but inconsistent, and that she is less likely to appear on Thursday evenings. That the secret to average transaction value is the combo meal upsell because it has a higher ticket price than individual items and registers better on the metric even if the margin is worse. That Auditorium 5 seats have a mechanical issue in row F, and passengers in row F, seats 3 through 7, will always be slightly reclined whether they want to be or not, and that this is a fact that generates complaints that are not your fault, but that you will receive on the floor as though they are. You take all of this in. You begin using the combo upsell. You avoid row F when possible. By the second month, your hours have increased to 30 through a combination of Paul being adequately impressed with your reliability and 2 other team members leaving within the same fortnight, which creates schedule gaps that you fill by being available, which you are because 30 hours is still below what you need and because being available is cheaper than looking for a second job. 30 hours at 1080 is after tax roughly $1,000 a month, which covers the box room rent with a margin that is not comfortable, but that represents solvency rather than the ongoing crisis of the previous period. You note this with the satisfaction of someone who has stopped a bleeding rather than healed a wound, which is the satisfaction available to you at this point, and you take it seriously. The customer interactions stratify over months into categories that you navigate without thinking consciously about them. There is the customer who cannot decide and who treats the decision about a medium versus large drink as a philosophical inquiry while 6 people wait behind them. And you have learned to offer the large with a price and a gentle physical suggestion, your hand already on the large cup, which moves the interaction forward 70% of the time. There is the customer who has a complaint about ticket prices, as though you set them, and you receive this complaint with the expression of someone listening carefully to a point they cannot address, which is the accurate expression because you cannot address the point. There is the customer who wants to bring food from outside, which is not permitted, and who argues this point with an energy that seems disproportionate to the stakes of the argument until you remember that everyone has a thing, and this is their thing today. And your response is always the same firm, even not unkind, not yielding, because this is the response that ends the conversation most reliably. The interaction you replay for a long time afterward, the one that costs you something specific, happens on a Saturday evening in the 4th month. A man in his late 40s, in a group of 4 adults who have been drinking before arrival, objects to the age rating check for a film that is rated 15. His daughter, he says, is 15. You are required to see ID for anyone who appears under 25, which is policy, which you explain. He says she clearly is 15. You say you understand, but the policy requires ID, and she doesn't have ID, and you cannot make exceptions. He says the things that men in their late 40s sometimes say when a service worker younger than them enforces a rule they find inconvenient, and the things escalate in a specific direction, and you stand there behind the counter, and you hold the policy, and you hold your expression, and you say, I understand you're frustrated. The policy is in place for everyone. If you'd like to speak with a manager, I can get them for you. He says, get the manager, you get Karen. Karen says the same thing you said in different words with more authority. And the man argues with Karen for 3 minutes and then leaves with his group and his daughter, not to the film, just out angrily. Karen comes back around the counter and says, good job, don't let them rattle you. She goes back to her office. You fill the next order. Your hands are completely steady, which you are aware of because you expected them not to be. And the steadiness of them tells you something about what this job has been quietly building in you, which is a particular kind of composure made of repetition. There is a culture at the cinema that is unlike the cultures of previous jobs in a way you don't identify until the 5th month, which is that everyone who works here has another thing. Priya is studying for A-levels. Seb writes music on a laptop in the box room and occasionally plays shows on weekends. A girl named Dot who works the early Saturday showing does textile design and has a small online shop that she mentions with a pride she partially disguises, as if the pride were embarrassing. The shift supervisor on Tuesday evenings, a quiet man named Omar, is finishing a master's degree in something to do with urban planning and always has a journal open on the break room table during his 10-minute window. The cinema is a job that people do in relation to something else, a scaffolding around another project. and you have been here 5 months, and your other thing is the absence of another thing, the awareness that you came here from a cafe and before the cafe from a series of other service jobs, and that the trajectory of your employment, if you graph it, does not describe an arc toward anything in particular. You sit with this in the break room, in the folding chair, and you eat your sandwich from home, and you look at the table and you think about it without resolution, because the resolution isn't available in the break room on a Tuesday, it's available somewhere else at some other time, and you go back to the floor. The manager situation reorganizes itself in month 6 when Paul takes a regional manager position and is replaced by a woman named Simone, who comes from another branch of the same chain, and who has a management style that is different from Paul's in specific and immediately felt ways. Simone is metrics driven in a more direct sense than Paul was. She introduces a new reporting structure that tracks concessions, revenue per customer, complaint incidents per shift, and auditorium turnaround time against a company standard. These numbers appear on a whiteboard in the staff area and are updated weekly, and everyone can see them, and everyone is aware that Simone can also see them. The complaint incident tracker is the one that produces the most tension because complaint incidents are partly generated by customer behavior that has nothing to do with staff conduct, the seat in row F, the ticket prices, the age rating policies, and staff who work high traffic shifts will naturally accumulate more incidents than staff who work Tuesday afternoons. You work high traffic shifts because you need the hours. You accumulate incidents. Simone does not address this directly. She addresses it by mentioning in a staff meeting at the end of month 6 that the complaints data is being reviewed and that customer service quality remains a priority. And she says this while looking at the whiteboard rather than at any specific person, which is a management technique for delivering a targeted message with plausible non-specificity. You speak to Seb about it afterward in the way you speak to Seb about everything, which is in the box room over microwave pasta with the kind of lateral honesty of people who are in the same situation and have dispensed with performance. He says Simone's numbers game is real and also partially rigged, which is a paradox he seems comfortable with. He says the way to survive it is to document everything, to use the incident report form for every single thing that could be classified as an incident, however minor, so that your incident to shift ratio looks more like a data collection effort than a service failure pattern. He says this is how the long-timers manage it. You start documenting. The whiteboard number next to your name stabilizes in a way that has nothing to do with fewer incidents and everything to do with the framing of incidents as documented events rather than performance failures, which is a distinction that matters only in the administrative layer of the job, but that the administrative layer is where the decisions that affect you are made. The projection booth becomes available to you in month 7 when the technician who maintains it takes a leave of absence, and Simone asks if anyone wants to train on basic projection operations. The pay differential is 60 pence an hour for shifts that include projection responsibilities, which is small and also not nothing. And the projection booth is physically separated from the floor, and the customers and Karen's predecessor and Simone's whiteboard, which is a form of compensation that doesn't appear in the pay structure but that you value with a specificity that surprises you. You say yes. You learn the digital projection system, which is not complicated in its fundamentals. The presentation files are prepared by the distributor. You load them, you check the audio levels, you start the show, and which has enough particular operational knowledge required about aspect ratios and certification codes and the proprietary software interface that it constitutes a genuine skill addition rather than just a task rotation. You are in the booth during showings. The booth is quiet and dim, and the films play on the other side of the glass, and you can see the images but not hear them unless you switch on the monitor. And you often don't switch on the monitor, and the films become silent images of things happening in another room, actors moving through scenes you can't access, which is both a loss and a relief. Priya gets her A-level results in August and leaves for university, which produces a warmth in the break room that is genuine and also contains something complicated because Priya's departure is a departure, a completion, a next thing arriving on schedule, and the break room is used to people's next things arriving. Seb's gigs, Dot's shop, Omar's thesis progressing, and you are not used to your own next thing being absent from the conversation in the break room the way an empty chair is absent present in the space it should occupy. You give Priya a card that everyone has signed. She says she'll miss working with you. You say good luck with everything. She goes. You go back to the floor. There is an evening in the ninth month, a Thursday in November, when you are in the projection booth during the last showing of the late screening, and you are watching the silent film through the glass, and the house is almost empty, 4 people in an auditorium built for 230, and you have a thought that you've been having in partial forms for a while, and that arrives this time with an unusual completeness, which is that you are good at this job in a way that you are not proud of in the way that pride usually operates. You are good at the counter efficiency and the upsell sequence and the post-showing clean and the projection operations and the incident documentation and the customer composure and the Karen avoidance and the Simone navigation. You have become competent in an environment and at tasks that you did not choose for reasons of interest or direction. And the competence is real, it is functional, it has kept you solvent and housed and present, and it is also somewhat beside the point of anything you might have once meant to become. You sit with this thought in the booth while the silent actors move through their silent drama on the other side of the glass, and you don't resolve it because it isn't the kind of thing that resolves in a projection booth on a Thursday in November, and after a while the film ends and the credits roll and you run the exit lights and you go down to help with the last clean. The 40th week brings a conversation with Simone that is not a performance conversation, which is the only kind of conversation with managers that you've learned to treat as non-threatening by its absence of threat. She says she's noticed your reliability on projection. She's noticed you've cross-trained on almost every area of operations. She says there may be a shift supervisor position opening in the new year if the current structure changes. And she's thinking about internal candidates. She says nothing is confirmed. She says she wanted you to know she's noticed. You say thank you. You go back to the floor. You tell Seb later and he says, that's good. Shift supervisor is $13.40 an hour. And you do the math in your head before he finishes the sentence, which is $13.40 times 35 hours times 4 weeks, which is a number that makes the box room something you could leave for a flat of your own, eventually at a pace that is no longer entirely theoretical. You do not know if you will take the supervisor role if it is offered. You do not know if you will still be here in 2 years, whether the cinema will be here. The industry's economics have been tightening at the edges of your awareness for the 9 months you've been inside them. Streaming numbers and attendance figures appearing in industry articles you've started reading without entirely knowing why. The same way you started reading projection equipment forums and box office tracking sites and the trade publications that circulate among cinema staff, like dispatches from a world that matters, to people who have been inside it long. Enough. You don't know what this reading constitutes, whether it is the groundwork of an ambition or just the habitual filling of knowledge that available environments provide. You hold the question the way you've learned to hold most things in this job, which is loosely because tight holding is expensive and the job will demand the resources you spend on holding things for its own purposes. It is a Saturday evening in month 10 and the rush is on and the queue is at the barrier and Karen is on the camera and you are at the counter moving through orders with the efficiency that 10 months of this have made effortless. And the customers come and you take their orders and you make the upsell in sequence and you fill the large popcorn with the scoop angle and the settle and top up and you hand it across the counter and you say, enjoy the film. And some of them say thanks and some of them say nothing and some of them say you too and then look embarrassed, which you've stopped finding funny but which you still notice. And the queue moves, and the films start, and the foyer empties, and the building fills with 230 people in each of 7 auditoriums sitting in the dark watching things happen on screens while you restock the butter dispensers and wipe down the counter and prepare for the interval rush that comes in 90 minutes when someone needs a drink, and the choice between missing the scene or getting up and making the choice that brings them here to you with their order in the middle of a story they've temporarily left. You are the person at the counter. The films play without you in the dark rooms on either side of the foyer. Somewhere in Auditorium 2, someone is watching a scene that will stay with them. You are in the light, restocking the napkin dispenser, and Seb is at the next register, and the building hums around you with a particular industry of an entertainment machine at full operation, and you are a working part of it, competent and unremarkable and present. And outside the doors, the city continues in its evening. And tomorrow you will be here again. And the day after that, and somewhere further in the future, there is a question that hasn't been answered yet, and that you are keeping in a place where it doesn't interfere with the restocking. Because the napkin dispenser is empty and the next customer is already at the counter and the film they want to see starts in 11 minutes. And this, right now, is the job.